wait, Wilson, wait, ready, go then! So what can we expect from test 2 this week in Barcelona? Well, the important thing is that temperatures are going to be up, the weather is going to be better. No snow predicted, slightly warmer conditions, probably still not anywhere near the kind of temperatures we would expect at most of the places that we go racing, but even so, much better than last week. The sun is going to be shining, and you know, it's going to be within a temperature range where, certainly with a little bit of extra work from the drivers, the teams and the drivers will be able to get their tyres into the working range that they need to be able to get some meaningful running done. These tyres have a very sort of limited or very small temperature window in which they operate. If you're outside of that window, they literally provide no grip. They're incredibly slippy on the tarmac, and when you start slipping the car, when you start pushing the car without the tyres being kind of switched on, if you like, they start to slide and then they start to grain. That means little bubbles, little baubles of rubber start to roll off the surface of the tyre. You lose even more grip, you start to grain more, and essentially it's this ever kind of increasing vicious circle of problems that they provide and that they cause, and it ultimately means that you can't really get very much done. It's got to be about mileage. Now lots of the teams did get at least some reasonable mileage done last week, you know, compared to other years perhaps. So some teams were certainly reliable enough to keep pounding around, and that means they can sign off most of the parts or lots of the parts on the car. The teams will go to these tests with a sign-off mileage in mind for many of the components on the car. That means that they have to reach that mileage without having any significant problems on each component, to then be able to sign it off as a race-worthy part. All of the Formula 1 teams have a very exhaustive and quite complex lifing procedure for pretty much every part on a Formula 1 car. Lifing procedure means that each part has a finite usable lifespan that it can be used for in racing conditions on the F1 car. Lots of those sign-off mileages can be achieved on a dyno, but lots of them just cannot be achieved unless you put them onto a real-life Formula 1 car on a real-life racetrack with the thing bouncing around dynamically as it would in race conditions. So they have to achieve those mileages before they can safely and confidently take the car and all its components racing. For some components, that lifespan might mean when they get to the end of that predicted lifespan, the part gets thrown away, gets chucked in the bin, and it gets replaced with a new one. For other components, it might mean that the lifespan just means that it has to be, once it's reached that mileage, has to be non-destructive tested, or crack checked, or ultrasonic checked, looking for signs of wear, or for cracks, or for signs of imminent failure. If it passes those tests, if it has no signs of any of those problems, potentially it could go back on the car, or it might be destined for a test part. I'm out of breath. Do you know what? I thought I was quite fit, you know, reasonably fit. I just walked up a set of steps, man, and I'm out of breath. I need to work harder. I fully expect to see lots more aero rakes on the car. Those giant metallic frames that you see sprouting off the back, lots of cameras, IR cameras, infrared cameras, as I say, measuring tyre temperatures, things like that. All this data collection equipment, because this final week of track running before Australia is absolutely crucial and critical to collect as much data as they can possibly get their hands on. Engineers love data. They're all utter geeks like me. Data is king. And so this is all about gathering as much of it as you can, so that the next couple of weeks before we actually hit the track in Australia will be spent sifting through that data in the fine detail that Formula 1 does best, looking for the advantages, any ways to improve things, no matter how small they might be. We'll see lots of flow-vis, you know, that green paint yellowy paint that you see splattered all over Formula One cars. A few people asked me recently why teams use that and why they would use that over and above the sensor rakes that you see all over the cars. Well, the aero paint, the Flovis, is just a really quick way of sort of corroborating the ideas that you have from the wind tunnel and from your CFD data of what the flow structures are doing around the car. So it doesn't measure pressures, of course, it doesn't measure the speed of the airflow like the sensors will give you, but it will give you the path that airflow follows around the surfaces of your car. And it's just a really quick and easy and cheap way of doing things. I might actually do a video on Flovis. Maybe we'll try and make some. The bluer skies and higher temperatures should mean that we'll start to see performance runs happening, certainly towards the end of the week. Lots of people have asked me about how, or do teams hide their performance? Do they sandbag? Do they hold stuff back to try and protect it from the other teams getting sight of it, getting wind of what they're up to? Well, yes and no. At the end of the day, sandbagging, as we sort of traditionally know it, so deliberately slowing the car down or not unleashing its full performance potential in front of the other teams, actually quite rarely happens. And the reason for that is that, you know, the teams need to know, for their own point of view, just how quickly they can go. They need to know what the potential of their own car is. And that is more important than trying to protect anything or hide anything from the opposition. Having said that, just occasionally the driver will go out for his first run in the car or his first day and come back reporting incredible things. And the data backs it up, and you know at that point, even though you may not have set the ultimate lap time that you can achieve, you know at that point you've got a good car. Just occasionally, when that happens, when you've got a big advantage over the rest, then perhaps you might want to start holding a little bit back. When you've seen the potential, when you know that it's there, maybe you'll do 3/4 of a lap at incredible full pace, but then just back it off. We saw teams doing that to some extent last year. Back off through the final sector, or abort the lap, come into the pits, just so your outright lap time doesn't become a headline and stand at the top of the timesheets, you know, a second faster than everybody else, and that becomes a thing that the whole world's talking about. Because if it does, all eyes are then on you. People are starting to pick your car apart with a fine-tooth comb, looking for the reason that you've got this advantage. More work around the barge board and side pod areas. It's a big area of development this year as teams have really got to grips with the new regulations from 2017 and what they can achieve, what cooling requirements the car has, and just how far they can push those areas. That's why we're seeing more development in that area than we did this time last year. I think we'll see increased development around the halo in terms of the fairings that teams apply to the halo. I think for teams like McLaren, possibly Force India, we're not really expecting this big update that's been promised until we actually get to Melbourne. And you might think, well, why on earth have they done that? Why aren't they rushing it through? They're going to bring it to Melbourne without any track testing. That's very true, but what they will get is 2 full sessions on the Friday, of course, in Melbourne to run it for real. They've also had very accurate modelling, wind tunnel and computational fluid dynamic simulation runs on whatever packages that they've dreamt up in their factories. They will have lots of data. Yes, it's absolutely better to have real track data, but what they are doing is pushing the time, the development time that they've got for these parts and for these updates as far back as they can. I'll give you a quick example here. When I was at McLaren, the front wings, for example, which were a huge area of development as they are now, used to be part numbered FW and then the number that it was. So the first wing was FW01. I remember going to Australia, the first race of the season, with FW13 on the car. The 13th iteration of that front wing. That shows you the rate of development that happens in these teams. So at some point you have to stop development and you have to go with whatever package you deem to be best at that point. What McLaren and others may well be doing is pushing that deadline far back as they can, because every week the wind tunnel is running, they're learning more and more, they're managing to find new ways to improve the wings, the barge boards, the aerodynamic surfaces. So the further they can push that deadline back, then perhaps the more performance they can bring to the car by the time it really matters in Australia. You know, I liken it a little bit to, you know, I love to have the latest and greatest mobile phone, for example. And, you know, you can wait and wait for the next one that's about to come out. You start to see the adverts of this next generation phone that's got all the gadgets and gizmos on it, and you want it, but it's not available for another 2 months. So you wait and wait, and eventually that moment comes around, the release date for your new phone, and then you start to see adverts for the next one, the next biggest and best thing. And you've got to question yourself, do you wait even longer for that one to come out? At some point, you've just got to go in. You've just got to go and get it and take the plunge, get the technology that's there available at that moment. And it's exactly the same for a Formula One team with their updates. You know, they can keep pushing, keep developing all the time. And they are, all the time. The cars are running on the wind tunnels, the computer simulations are running all the time. And all the time they're running, they're finding little areas of improvement. But at some point, you've got to stop that. You've got to say, right, we'll take this level of development and we're going to run with it. We're going to take it racing. Wilson, wait here. The Formula One teams will have flights booked from the UK or from wherever their base is down to Melbourne, down to Australia, right up until flights that land on Saturday morning, so qualifying day, because that's the last point you can start putting new major components on the car. So they will have people booked in at the factory. Wilson, come here. Come here. So they'll have people booked in from the factory on standby to get on those flights just in case there's a new component ready that could still make it to Melbourne in time to get on the car before qualifying. Sometimes those flights are used, sometimes they're not. Wilson, wait here. So it should be an exciting week in all areas, but Formula One specifically, we should, by the end of this week's test, have at least some idea of the performance levels, the pecking order of each of these teams. Of course, it won't be definitive. We won't know that really until after Melbourne, until we've gone through an entire race weekend, but we will get some idea of what each team has in their back pocket. And I can't wait to find that out. Let me know what you think of the video. Please do like it and share it. Hit that little share button down there somewhere. Pop it on Twitter, pop it on Facebook. Let's spread the word on this. We're getting close to the start of the season now, and I really hope that this vlog is going to be a really useful source of information and entertainment for you guys once we get going. So for now, thanks very much. See you in the next one. What are you doing?